that model as well as some other states. So we'll look at different ways to approach, of course, how to support financially in a crisis. In June, we'll look at the startup scene and we'll realize, how crisis provides opportunity for innovation. There we'll talk to some incubators and accelerators to understand kind of what's been going on during the pandemic. And then in July, we'll look into cybersecurity in a virtual world. Of course, with working from home, this has changed quite drastically how we keep our coworkers safe. This series will end in January of 2022. So future topics also will be released once we know them. But for the while, just keep an eye on our events page. I'll also have, if you, of course, are interested, there'll be mailings going out to promote these. So we would love if you would like to join us at future events. Before we get started, I just want to have a couple of quick housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself during the presentations. You can unmute yourself during the Q&A session at the end. But this helps stop background noise and keeps everybody focused and on track while the presentations are going. In addition, if you do have questions or comments throughout the chat, you can send that in the chat function. You can either send it to a speaker, myself, or to everybody. Hopefully we're all familiar with the Zoom platform, but it's pretty self-explanatory. If you are having any technical difficulties, there is also GACC Midwest. My colleague is on the line today. You can contact her for support. And then to change speaker views, on the top right of your screen, you can switch between speaker view and gallery view. When we do get into the presentations, it may be a little bit easier to see, who the presenter is by changing this view. At the end, we'll also drop a survey link for you to fill out. It's not automated, so you'll have to click the link to go to the survey. This really is just for internal purposes. It'll help us know what you really liked about the session today, what we can do better. If there's anything, really that you would like, a topic you would like addressed in the future. Luckily, with this government-funded initiative, we have a lot of flexibility to look at different topics. So tell us what you're experiencing, what you're seeing out there, and this could be something, that we'll look into in future months. Then really quickly, I just want to say thank you to our guest speakers. Today we have Saskia. I'll let her give a little bit more of an introduction to herself later, but she's from Fraunhofer-Institute for Material Flow and Logistics. She'll talk about, of course, what they're doing and the research she's done in her role to look more at how the supply chain's been disrupted and how to improve, of course, the logistical processes. We have Thomas Zeller from UPS also online, and UPS Germany, excuse me. He'll speak about how, in his role, how he's experienced the disruptions from the pandemic, and of course, be available to answer any questions that maybe you've also experienced, just with a different perspective in his role. And then lastly, we'll have Merlin from Gebrüder Weiss speak. He's local to the Chicagoland area for your local logistics support. He'll be able to talk about kind of what they've seen and maybe a few case studies in their network. So today, what we'll talk about is how COVID-19 pandemic has, of course, disrupted global supply chains, how you can manage demand fluctuation to optimize supply chain performance, and how you can create more resilient supply chain processes in your operations. So without further ado, we can get started with the presentations today. To also briefly give an overview, we'll do 20-minute presentations from each speaker, and then at the end, we will have a panel discussion. So we'll do about 20 minutes at the end to talk with our speakers, and I know some of you submitted questions prior to the webinar today in your registration form. I have those compiled, and we'll ask those speakers also at the end to give their insight to the questions. And yeah, so we can go ahead and get started. Then I would like to hand the screen over to Saskia Sardesai. Hopefully I'm saying your last name correctly. She is Senior Scientist at Fraunhofer-Institute for Material Flow and Logistics. Saskia has an impressive background on logistical processes and concepts, and we're looking forward to hearing about the experiences she has. Very quickly, there is an agenda in the link that my colleague posted in the chat. If you'd like to read more about Saskia's background, as well as understand how the webinar looks today, feel free to download that agenda and you'll get information on all the speakers. So Saskia, I will turn the screen over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks also for the nice introduction. My name is indeed a bit difficult, so but just let me get into the presentation mode. I had to switch a bit here. Do you see the right screen at the moment? You see the full presentation mode?
Nope, I think you'll just have to switch it. I see your note.
Oh, that's strange. Okay, I just like that?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, good. Then, yeah, so thanks a lot for the first introduction. Just for, yeah, my name is difficult indeed. It's Sardesai. It's, yeah, it's with a sharp S, very unusual for Germans actually also. Yeah, I'm a senior scientist at Fraunhofer-Institute. So it's one of the big research institutions in Germany. I come in the next slide, I shortly introduce Fraunhofer, and then I will come into my major topic, which is about risk management, and to have a look what kind of the effects are in terms of supply chain management. Since we have got always very complex supply chains in the background, a certain disruption in one country already causes sometimes issues on a global front. But also, like we have it currently experienced with this global disruption of COVID, we actually face some additional issues. Yeah, so first of all, a bit about my institute. So we have got 72 institutes all over Germany. So we are quite famous in Germany as such. Not that much famous in somewhere abroad. It's mainly because we are mainly funded by the German government and have a lot of research projects with the German government as well, and German companies. So that's why we are touching less the overseas companies. Still, we have some institutes also located abroad. But each of the institutes has got a different focus, and the one in Dortmund is focusing on material flow and logistics. So that's where supply chain management is also fitting in quite well. So that's why I want also to start in what is actually the motivation for risk management and risk management in supply chains. So what's happening also apart from COVID, we had also in our short discussion upfront, we had there some discussions going on about general security management within supply chains. So that's exactly what's expressed here on this slide. So we have got constant issues apart from major disruptions. So they are mainly kind of operational issues, but also these disruptions which are coming in, they require to make to include more flexibility and to ensure that the supply chain is knowing how to deal in case there is interruption coming. So in that context, the transparency is one of the major factors to actually address also volatile market developments. So these ones are the major risks which we are facing. So we can not only have a look at general process or steering risks, which are affecting the own company internally, but we also have demand risks. We have got supply risk on the other end, and we have got external risk factors, which are mainly the environmental risks, risks of sustainability, or risk of cyber attacks, for example. So, and then I have brought with me an overview, so two graphics which are showing quite nicely the development of disruptive events in the last years, so in the last decades. And one is actually seeing that there's like a nice increasing trend in volatility. This is like, that means actually that we have to prepare the supply chain further to enable the supply chain also to react flexibly to this volatile environment. So on the left side, you actually see the different disruptive events. Once events caused by humans, but also natural calamities. So both of them are having mainly an increasing trend. And if we have a look at on the right hand graphic, here you also see what kind of risk could actually cover it by an insurance, and which kind of risks were uncovered loss. And also here we can see that the uncovered loss is quite strong. So it's a strong initiative for supply chains to ensure that they can internally react to these to the upcoming events, to those disruptions or the general volatility parameters which are coming in. So once we have a look at COVID, naturally, once I had a look a bit on the different examples, which are appearing in or which appeared during the COVID crisis. And often I just thought by myself, okay, we still have to consider that most of the supply chains are global. We are actually dealing with a global delivery setting, and we need to have the whole setting is actually efficient. The structure of those supply chains have been actually set up in such a manner that they act in the most efficient way, so that the costs are actually reduced majorly. So that means actually that those supply chains are easily to be broken. They can't there's not a lot of redundancy in the supply chain. And once we actually set them up again, ramp them up again, we have to actually have a look at the lead times. So global supply chains often have got a lead time as long as 90 days, and this is a long time. So if in US or in Europe the COVID crisis is actually overcome, then we can't just immediately say, okay, our supply chain on the other hand immediately needs to have the products in hand. So so in addition also, the COVID crisis was actually causing an unusually setting that both the supply chain, the supply end and the demand end were affected. While normally in any other kind of disruptive event, it's most of the time either the demand or the supply chain, or the supply of the supply chain. So if we have a look at the different examples, I do see if this does not want to act as much as I want here. Now it's working. Okay. So I brought a few examples along with me. So we have got a disruption of the production in several industries. So that was happening mainly last year. So I brought the example of the steel industry here. So in 2020, the steel industry was mainly reducing capacities by around 40%. So overall of the overall in the steel industry over the different companies. And the effect which it had now is that now that the ramp up phase is coming up again, there's not enough steel in the market. So the prices of steel at the moment is actually doubling. Then there are a lot of missing resources. You might have heard of especially in the semiconductor industry, that the automotive industry is lacking a lot of chips, so they cannot produce as much as they actually wanted to. So during the ramp up phase, they see that there's a big bottleneck happening along with the chips, with the availability of chips. So what do they do now? They have to reduce the amount of cars which they actually plan to produce, and they so they actually take the most profitable cars or production items which they actually, or products which they can sell to the customer. And what they do also, they try to make an intercompany exchange of these chips, so that they actually can at least let each major factory run. So and also that's what I want to say with the missing resources. So what the automotive industry is experiencing at the moment, it's the same thing what actually happened last year with the medicinal products. So the medicinal products, they had a demand increase by more than 500% last year in some industries. So what's actually happening is that they also had to quickly ramp up. They had to find the missing resources. They had to identify the bottlenecks and ramp up the company or the factory in a very quick manner. And then there's one point which was also coming up in our small breakout room. It's about the freight capacities. So if we have a look at the Europe, at the container transport between Europe and China, if we take the price of January in 2020 or March 2020 last year, that was shortly before the crisis, there we had a container price of $1,400. And if we have a look now into January 2021, we're actually paying $8,000 per container. So that's a tremendous price increase. And in addition to that, the reliability of the transports is also not provided. So just to have a short example, in July to October 2020, there was an average delay of 16 days of a container. So that means it's really disrupting the supply chain, and it's coming then, or what's following out of that are this typical bullwhip effects, where something is actually ordered, then it can't be produced, so you have got a disruption within the production planning, and again you can't send out the items. So it's so this information flow really needs to be communicated, or this information, whatever or delays what is happening in the supply chain, requires communication. So just to have an overview once, what was the major issues from an objective view here over several industry sectors. So what mainly everybody was experienced was that there was actually too less knowledge about the supplier structure, about who's actually the first tier supplier. And if that was known, then the second tier supplier, that was already difficult for most of the companies. Who is actually the second tier, and in which country are they actually located, so that they could estimate what is the pandemic situation in this country. Then there were always a lot of, then there was no knowledge about the actual status of the first tier company, the first tier supplier, or what's the second tier supplier. And there were very, very unclear effects on important supply chain partners. So who's actually the most important supply chain partner for me, and in which kind of status is this company at the moment? And then also within the company, we had a missing transparency of stocks in pipeline. So there was hardly any knowledge what is coming now inside the company, and then it also needs to be transferred into the production area. So what is planned now in the production? How do we reduce the amount of capacity needed in the production area? And what happens now with the pipeline stock which is incoming? So also here in the automotive industry was like reducing quite a lot of the production during last year. And what happened is that the inbound was like filling up quite strongly. So they had actually issues with their storage requirements, or with the available storage in hand. And then, yeah, okay, discontinuity of the own production. That was an issue. Also, the planning phase. When do we actually ramp up again? But also, the own production was then combined with the unclear staff availability. So, what would be? I mean, is the staff really available in next week, or do they need to take care of homeschooling? Do they need to take care of elderly? Do they actually get sick in this pandemic situation? So these kind of planning items were complicating the own planning within the production area as well. And then often the structure of the company is mainly set up in on a very it's actually assuming that everything is working smoothly. So in this situation of the pandemic, these organizational settings were becoming a bit inefficient. And then last but not least, we have naturally the unclear demand situation, which one had to recheck every moment again. So then what is actually the recommended course of action? So what can one actually do in this kind of situation? So there are some of the propositions which I will come up now with, they are something for the future. There's also something which one has to work on currently. So there is there's one item which is mainly about the short term level. So during the pandemic, one had to synchronize the ramp up. So once one company is ramping up, one has to see what is the status of the suppliers. So have they already ramped up? What is the lead time? Who's actually the most relevant supplier, and what is the supply logistics? So at what point do I actually get the parts so that I can also ramp up my own production? Then on the downstream side, we need to analyze and synchronize the distribution logistics. So also, when does my customer start production, or when does the final customer actually wants to have the product? Then you also have to integrate the customers on an early stage to make your own individual planning. And there are also, as the demand scenario is so insecure, it was important to actually define what might be different or possible demand scenarios. So there were a lot of discussions going on, like a V scenario, a W scenario. So these kind of scenarios had to be discussed and transferred into the own planning area. So then there's in the short-term area towards the supplier, there's one point which is coming up now in the next second. It's about the financial management, also to see what is the actual status of the finances with my supplier, and to find supply chain finance solutions to support the supplier in case it's required. Yeah, and then the two major points, overall, the supply chain is mainly the daily coordination and status updates. So information about the status, the actual status in the supply chain, and to provide transparency of the own supplier. So who's actually supplying me, which kind of capacity do they have in hand, and which kind of lead times do they need? Yeah, then I missed out the 2 points here. The revision of sourcing strategies and the creation of redundancies. So naturally, if the supplier is not able to deliver, one needs to see, okay, what is the amount which I actually require next time in the next delivery from the supplier, and at what point. Yeah, so medium to long term, it's important to make certain stress tests for supply chain resilience. So to enable supply chain resilience, to have a look at different flexibility options, and then to make kind of stress tests. So which kind of scenarios, which kind of risks do I need to have to consider, what is the entry probability, what is the outcome of this risk, and then to evaluate that the setting onto the supply chain. And then to have a look at the different resilience options, what might be the different flexibility potentials for my own company. Yeah, and then on the demand side, it's mainly to adjust the forecast processes to see what kind of suitable forecast processes are available. Especially currently, during the pandemic, we had issues that there was a complete, we did not have data to rely this new demand situation on. So here it might have helped to build up some AI possibilities to actually check out the possibilities of social media. One tool which is able to support in these stress tests, to have a look at different scenarios, how to ramp up a company again or factory, is supply chain simulation. So to have a dynamic setting of the supply chain based on digital data. So you have, and that you can actually analyze the different ramp-up scenarios. So mainly for supply chain simulation, you need to integrate data of the supply chain structure. You need to have data of the bill of materials between the companies, the capacities, or at least the expected capacities, and the expected demand. And out of that, several scenarios can be set up. And then one can use the simulation to evaluate when to start which kind of factory, where to place inventory in the pipeline, and which further risks do we need to consider. And it can also, it shows certain bottlenecks, and also at which point the material is available for production. So we have simulated once here a scenario where we actually said, okay, what happens if the capacity is actually reduced by a second wave of COVID? So that was mainly happening half a year back that we did this analysis. But it's helping you to see at what point can I actually cover the demand, and at what point do I need to inform also my supplier or my customer that I can't deliver. Then there's one further project which I would like to mention here shortly. It's a European project which we are involved to at the moment. I mention it here because it's quite interesting. It's focusing on SMEs, and it's trying to boost adaptability, resilience, and flexibility in the European manufacturing sector. And it focuses, or it's giving a special focus on vital medical supply and equipments. And it provides then in the end, several service components to support Europe in improving its response time and preparedness to deal with pandemics. So the main goal is also to set up a kind of digital technopole where these different services are actually clustered in, and then to enable a 48-hour industrial response to these medical requirements. Okay, so I hope you like the insights of the presentation. If you, I would look forward for questions coming up in the panel discussion, and otherwise I'm always open for further discussions on a later stage then.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Saskia. Incredibly fascinating. Yeah, thank you. For those of you who haven't already seen in the chat function, you can download all of the presentations. So if you're interested, of course, also with connecting with Saskia further, her contact information, of course, is on that PowerPoint. Feel free to download that PowerPoint from all of our presenters today and connect with them, of course, if you have other questions that may or may not be addressed in our panel. Next then, just to keep eye on time, I would like to hand the screen over to Thomas Zeller. He is the Director of Strategy and Marketing at UPS in Germany. I see, Thomas, you have your screen shared, so I will let you take it away.
So unmuting helps. Huh?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, good afternoon, and I'm happy to be here. Originally, I'm from Switzerland. I actually lived in all the 3 countries here that are mentioned that I'm responsible for now. It's interesting to see in the breakout group, I was actually thinking I could hold the presentation in German, right? So it's really interesting to see the history lines and who's coming from where and what brought you guys over to the US. Lived myself 2 years in Atlanta, and I've been my 19th year now with UPS. 16 years out of Switzerland, traveling the world as well as many of you. And yeah, I would say this pandemic situation has really shaken up everything. I guess, after all, I would say the logistics sector as such is probably one of the sectors that benefited the most. And it's really interesting to see, because at times when you read the newspaper, when you are sitting in meetings, logistics meetings, you kind of forget that out there there's a pandemic going on, right? I mean, it's kind of like, well, what's the production? What's the volume and revenue numbers doing? And it's a little bit at times, it's kind of, first of all, a bit embarrassing. At the same time, it's kind of schizophrenic if you're in a pandemic and there are actually sectors that really benefit from it. But I guess that's how life is, and we definitely have been challenged with that as well. And in the next 20 minutes, and I hope I can keep the time as well as Saskia did. So I want to show you a little bit like a 360 view on the items that this pandemic is impacting for a global player like we are. I will give a few insights into Germany, but also in general, because ultimately we are part of a global network. We move 3% of world's GDP, so we kind of impacted everywhere. And obviously, I mean, some of the questions that came before the actual presentation now already happened about, how can I make sure I have capacity from different continents? So without further ado, I kind of step in. I mean, we are living in thrilling times. And if my presentation moves, you can actually see the picture, which actually one fact I would really like to highlight right now is that today, exactly today, a year ago, the WHO announced Corona or COVID to be a worldwide pandemic. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know, Brooke, if you chose that date, by intention, but that's the map actually back there, right? And kind of, I remember like I was still skiing in February. It was like, okay, there's a virus in China. What else? It will probably stay there. And then it started somewhere in Munich area, and all of a sudden, you had this picture. And it's not true anymore, but it's really thrilling times, right? And interesting enough for our industry, it has really been a thrilling time in case of like capacity of growth, but also of really becoming a sector of public concern. Actually, as a matter of fact, we became system relevant, right? So that is one thing that usually you bring in contact with hospitals and everyone who's actually taking care of healthcare, was in the healthcare sector. But logistics was deemed during those times now to really be very, very important for the public life as well, and not just delivering vaccines, which I will get to in a minute as well. Yeah, massive changes have occurred, and I mean, all of us, and I think depending on the country you live in, you got more massive cuts than others, but to a point, certain parts of the economy have really come to a standstill or have even been restricted. It has really been challenging for us as well, because ultimately, when you move 3% of world's GDP, you kind of are, what Saskia showed nicely, in that supply chain hitting various stages in a production life cycle or customer life cycle. And from that perspective, it was really a challenge for us to make sure that the goods get moved out of Asia to Europe and to the US. And we have really had the chance, and also in a way, you never know until the crisis hits, but we really have proven that our network is really stable. And we were able to re-switch flights. So we didn't introduce more planes, but we re-switched flights in the sense of like during the first shutdown, we had 4 flights out of China. We were at a certain stages the only ones flying out of China. I mean, even railway, right, has become all of a sudden really a big network component. Globally, there was a shift, and we were kind of prepared. And it sounds interesting, or also a little bit funny to say we were prepared. Of course, nobody was prepared for the pandemic, but it's not the first time in a 113-year history, or almost 114 years history, that we were faced with crisis. And you know, it started kind of like 2019, and it was mentioned with the steel crisis, right? That obviously impacted in Germany specifically, one of our major or core industries that the country, first of all, but also logistics and other sectors grew with, and that was the automotive and manufacturing industry. So then came the trade wars that were impacted as well between China and the US. But one item that we kind of, when we prepared, and I don't have really text-heavy slides, so I'm kind of staying with pictures, but one item that I think it's kind of up here, if I position it now here, if I position it correctly, it was 2010. It was the Icelandic volcano, and I tried to pronounce it Eyjafjallajökull, if I pronounce it correctly, but it kind of shut down all flights in Europe and in the US. And that was obviously a major challenge for us, anyone, but for logistics namely. And we were actually able at that time already to switch in Europe to the ground network, making sure that we could still, you know, do our part to the economy and to uphold business life and the economy. But it's obviously not comparable to a virus, so please don't get me wrong on that. So, but I think one thing, and crises are different, right? And I think today it's also 10 years of Fukushima. So if you look back, right, and you see what those crises, even though they're different and they're probably in form and shape and impact different, but one thing they have in common, and that's how they show weaknesses in systems, in logistics systems, in political systems, if I may call it out this way. And it really accelerates existing and trends we've seen coming, and it also accelerates megatrends. So one item that really has had a huge impact on us was obviously B2c E-Commerce. And we were talking about the change it had to business models. I'm not sure on the US side, I think, you know, online e-commerce is way ahead of certain European countries, and I will get to that later on. But obviously with people sitting at home, working from home, all of a sudden, you know, at times you were not able to get into stores. We still can't go in stores. I mean, now they open up here in Germany, but you have to schedule an appointment to actually get into a store. So more and more, you know, we really had to make sure that our system was supporting, not just ours, our competitors' networks as well are supporting daily lives. And it, you know, it had with printed cartridges. It was foods, right? Like HelloFresh of the world. That these are like food delivery companies really grew like crazy during those times. And e-commerce really has also had an impact on traditional, let's say, more brick and mortar industries where even manufacturing companies. And I think that's interesting to see when maybe Saskia gives a presentation in 5 years' time, how that changed those industries that really went through wholesale and through brick and mortar. They really started up using more online as well. We saw a big shift in those industries to shift to omni-channel. Even before the pandemic, we saw immense growth in national shipping. What concerns B2C, I mean, it has increased, right? Retail, and especially with Amazon, right? The online ordering got much bigger. So if you look at the growth rate globally, 2018 versus 1998, it grew from 4.6 billion to 14.9 billion, which is about 224%. So that was already before the pandemic. There was a huge growth in online retail predominantly. The gross sales of retail doubled from 10.2 billion to 22 billion in Germany alone in the last 5 years. So these are significant numbers that actually the B2B part does not reflect that way in the 5 years. The expectation is actually huge as well. So it's not like we have kind of reached the peak and it's over. The opposite is the case. From 2020 up until 2024, the global e-commerce, B2C e-commerce sales are expected to grow by 34% from almost 2 trillion to 2.6 trillion. So these are numbers that are not seen in any other industry. I think what is interesting is what when I say COVID-19 accelerated that trend, is that like 30 to 50% of the buyers, the online buyers, were first-time buyers. So I don't know about the US so much. It's been 10 years that I've not lived in the US, but some countries in Europe, they were very concerned about buying online. You know, security, data protection, all these kind of like payment terms, giving the credit card number to an online platform. But the proportion of people ordering the first time online, and now actually indicating in studies that Kearney did, for example, to say like, no, we probably stick with e-commerce, with ordering online. That is an effect that COVID has accelerated big time. And we believe, you know, when we have to do forecasts internally, we definitely believe that it won't go back to normal. I mean, it will be the new normal. Of course, I mean, I just heard a broadcast yesterday here where it said, well, shopping, right, in a store has still some kind of emotional effect. You go in there, you get some advice, right? You can talk to someone, you can try things, but it won't go back to what we knew before COVID hit. I think when we talk about why and how UPS could contribute, and I can tell you 2020 was one record year for us and for the entire industry. And it's kind of saddens me to say, I mean, on one hand side, we are definitely very, very happy about the results. On the other hand, obviously, it's never really a good reason when people die because of a virus. So, but it definitely makes things thinking change. It makes the way you look at things change as well. And I think the way we were able to contribute so smoothly to the basic supply of citizens during the pandemic was that we were able, with the network, to kind of provide a kind of normalcy. One of the items that was interesting for us as well is all of a sudden my team was, from one day to the other, was not in the office anymore, right? I mean, they literally carried screens and desktops to their homes. And for over a year now, they work from home. So that's a big change, right? Then also really making sure that all the business relevant items are still carried out. So to be able to have a workforce that is safe, that is healthy, and to make sure that on a daily basis we are able to deliver those products, that was on the basis of our network. So B2C was one big thing. Really has had a drag on us as well, because obviously when you have a business stop, so to speak, right, as a logistics company, it's usually more profitable than a residential stop, because with a business stop you go with more packages than a residential stop. That's usually one package. So that has definitely had a challenge on our network as well. And it was shown before in Saskia's slide deck as well. We can see that we had staffing issues too. So there was a lack of cars, there was a lack of staffing. So everybody suffered of that. I mean, to kind of turn on the network as quickly as possible. Healthcare was a big item. Healthcare was something that we have been investing into like years back already. We have a unique business unit in our company for healthcare. And I think here the investments we've kind of taken years back have proven to be really helpful during the pandemic. And what is really important right now is that we are at the forefront as well of vaccine deliveries. And this is not just in the US. We deliver vaccines in Europe as well. I mean, these are really kind of like top secret routes as well, right? It's high security, but it's also the aspect of really making sure that the temperatures are kept, right? Especially for Pfizer, that vaccine needs to have a low temperature. AstraZeneca a bit higher, but still we need to make sure that in the process, throughout the course of the transportation, we keep that product safe. And we do that through partnering, but we also made acquisitions like Marken, for example, which is now a US company that actually helps us making sure that we have the products and the capabilities of supporting that need. Cold chain, additional freezers capacity, that was something we had to turn on very quickly, right? Because as these medications came out, we also learned about what the requirements were. So in general, we handle regulated medicine in more than 10 million square feet in facilities of 32 countries. And one thing that when you look at the temperature control and all these investments we took, and now the vaccine, the adjustments we made because of the pandemic to the vaccine deliveries will actually help us in the future too. And that's the interesting thing about crisis. You can adapt and change to future needs. And when you look into what new drugs are in the pipeline, more than 50% of those will be biologics. So similar to what you get today as a vaccine. And that really makes sure that we are, what we invest and at the network we build up for the vaccines are also sustainable beyond the pandemic, which hopefully will be over very soon. So with that network being global, we can really make usage of our presence in 220 plus countries. Apart from that, I mean, when you look from one crisis to the other, within 5 or 10 years, technology takes a big stance as well. And how we move goods is also something that is subject to change. Versifying is a building block of crisis resilience. And we are actually, changing also the way, and this looks funny, but it's actually really important, especially probably in the area of Chicago or the Middle East, Midwest as such. This is how you walk on icy surface, right? This is how they practice walking on slippery slopes, so to say. And this is technology that is also not just on the training side for our drivers, but also anywhere in any context. Technology is improving through such crises as well and helps us also handling such crisis. So we are the first company that actually got full approval from the US Federal Aviation Administration for a drone flight company. And the company is called UPS Flight Forward. And this example here is a joint venture or a partnership we have with CVS Health. That drone here is flying, and unfortunately I can't show the video because the data line is not that great. Probably can provide it to you later on, or you can or share it otherwise. But we actually fly from one pharmacy to one of the largest retirement homes in Florida. So that really helps to have a fast delivery of prescription drugs and support the social distancing during the crisis. So we don't have to drive there, we don't have to get into contact, and this works actually pretty well. We also use some drones, not similar here because they have a much further distance to travel. It looks more like a model plane in Ghana, where we also deliver now vaccines to remote areas. So we are also part of the CARE movement and help there to make sure that the vaccine distribution is equal and fairly organized. One thing that was really big, and I probably have to watch time now a little bit anyway, but I'm getting closer. So I see Brooke still laughing, so that's okay. I'm still good. One item that I think people rightfully so raised their hands was the climate. Right, the climate obviously probably in certain instances, I don't know how you feel, but I felt like we all of a sudden had real seasons again. Right, we had winter, we had summer, we had a lot of sunshine, and I don't know, maybe it's lesser planes in the sky. I'm not an expert, but one of the items that didn't go away throughout the crisis was obviously the climate. And with the climate and with the cities and with obviously also the online ordering, you can't drive into cities all the time. You got to be careful with that. So one of the items that is really important for us are alternative fuels. Currently, we operate more than 10,000 vehicles with alternative drives, with another 10,000 on the way. So these vehicles here, that's in Germany, these vehicles here used to be diesel vehicles. So they have like probably 300,000-400,000 kilometers. That's probably, I don't know, 200,000 miles down. And they were then converted into electric vehicles, fully electric vehicles. So there's alternative fuels like gas, e-vehicles, that really help us also make sure that with the increase in B2C and the increased deliveries we have, that we also make sure that here we become more sustainable. But one big item, especially in cities, and as people move more into cities, right, because of their jobs or also other reasons, we have come more into city logistic projects. And this is an electric cargo bike. I think it can carry like 250 to 300 kilos. It's obviously waterproof, and you can lock it, so it's very, very safe. But we kind of started that 2012 already in Hamburg, and it kind of works with a container that is stationed somewhere central, and then normal bikes, e-bikes, cargo bikes, drive up there, pick up the packages, and drive around in the city. Uses less space, doesn't plug up or jam up traffic, and also makes sure that there's not too much exhaust. So by 2025, 40% of the fuel used in UPS ground fleet will actually come from sources other than conventional gasoline, and which is doubling from 2016. And also the electricity that we use for those vehicles will be by 2025, 25 to 30% of renewable energy. So that's also a big change. 25 to 30% of the vehicles have last year already been purchased with alternative fuel or electricity. So that's one of our big items in our strategy, is to be sustainable and to really give back to the communities we actually live in and we serve. So a lot of investment that we did, right, in closing now and then come to the end. So a lot of in the investments we did in the past, we had no idea that they would help us this time around when a pandemic hits. But I think it also sharpens your senses in regards to when you take decisions that are more mid-long term, to really think about what would it do if something like that happens again, or or look into the mega trends, right? And as you could see, what I mentioned now quickly in 20 minutes, and you could probably speak a week about those topics, but you could really tell that certain mega trends are pushed forward and accelerated due to any kind of crisis that come along. So one of the items for us is really important is that global trade and trade barriers and the tariffs, obviously, they remain big challenges UPS has to face. And what we really try to promote is to make sure that the authorities make sure that in those times as well, the trade agreements and any other kinds of facilitations and simplifications hold firm. One of the items that you don't see so much that is in the back of a logistics company as well is brokerage. Really important, right? Especially from deliveries, Europe, US, and also Asia. And yeah, we just want to make sure that within our lobbying and our connections with local authorities, that we create policies and regulatory frameworks that promote actually a comprehensive and mutually beneficial business environment that obviously during pandemic situations are also very fruitful, very helpful. So having said that, and closing it out, we still live according to one of Jim Casey's, who's our founder. One of his quotes: "Determined people make conditions. They don't allow themselves to be victims of them. Determined people working together can do anything." And I think that's what has shown, not just in logistics or with UPS, but throughout the pandemic, that when people work together and don't let themselves down during such a crisis, they get out stronger and better, and identify and create new things. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope it was informative.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Thomas. Also, very incredible. I have the same words to say to you as I did to Saskia. Really interesting, your remarks. Thank you so much for giving an explanation of where UPS is at, where your visions are moving out of this, of course. And I think it's also really interesting that a lot of the same with alternative fuels and the climate change, tackling that crisis, of course, also is still at the forefront in this current crisis we're at. Also, we're slightly behind time, so just to keep with it, Merlin Dow from Gebrüder Weiss, sales manager, is our next presenter. He's going to give a little bit of insight into logistics locally here and what he's been seeing. If you do have any questions, just want to plug this in again to Saskia or Thomas, feel free to put them in the chat and we will address them in the next, after Merlin's presentation. So if you're holding on to anything, please feel free to speak up and we will talk about them shortly. So Merlin, the screen is yours.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Let me just get this set up real quick. All right. Good morning, everybody. Just real quick about myself. My name is Merlin Dow. I'm with Gebrüder Weiss here in Chicago. As you guys probably can hear in my accent, I'm a German native. I'm born and raised in Germany. Been here for about 14 years. I work with Gebrüder Weiss for about 12 years now, and I'm in charge for the trade lane development between Germany and the USA, as well as the automotive industry. Just very briefly about Gebrüder Weiss, for those who don't know us, we are the oldest logistics company in the world. And some quick facts and figures. So we have about 150 locations. We do air freight, sea freight, import, exports, domestic trucking in Europe, in the US, customs brokerage. But I don't want to bore you guys with this. Just for me to go right into it, I want to talk about the air freight market in 2020 and 2021. As I'm sure a lot of you have seen, the rates have really changed during the pandemic, especially in the beginning. For quite a while, the rates have really increased. For instance, for European inbound air freight, Germany inbound to the US, we usually had like 80 cents to $1 a kilo. The high that we have reached last year for some of those lanes went up to 35 euros a kilo. This, of course, has come down significantly since then. The same has happened on the Trans-Pacific market on the China inbound, where we typically had $2 to $4 a kilo. We reached upwards of $20 a kilo for standard service. That all had to do with the amount of loss of cargo aircraft that we had and passenger aircrafts. In the beginning of the pandemic, we lost about 80% of our global flights. In the same time, airlines started then to convert passenger aircraft into cargo aircraft. As you can see in one of my pictures, almost every airline did this. And then something also very unusual happened in the winter flight schedule. For those who don't know what it is, it's between October and March. There's typically a reduced capacity of passenger aircraft flights because there's less travel. What the airlines, however, did last year, they added a couple of flights here and there to help with the situation and the supply and demand. And going into 2021 now, we are in the talks with all of our carriers. And one thing that we have seen across the board pretty much is that carriers are taking out flight capacity. For instance, United Airlines, I think is a good example. They currently operate 3 daily flights from Frankfurt to Chicago. And in the upcoming weeks, this is going to be reduced down to 1 flight, which of course is not the situation that we're all looking for, just because that means supply and demand is again changing. I mean, taking out 66% capacity really means that rates will continue to rise this year. On top of that, of course, we have additional and continuous vaccine shipping throughout the world. This will also play into supply and demand. And going a step further, and I think it was mentioned before, is the e-commerce. What has happened last year is just unbelievable and unprecedented in terms of e-commerce sales. It's booming. And we as a company see it based on the imports and exports that we handle for customers that sell to Amazon, Macy's, Costco. Every company you can find, any of the .coms have been just booming like crazy. On the ocean freight side of things, and I hope not everything is repetitive for you who've been in the industry for a while. We had about 2 months of no shipping from China last year. After that, here in the US, we started to have some port shutdowns. Some of the smaller ports like Florida and others started to shut down because either they had actual cases of COVID and needed to shut down for a couple of days. But in the same time, they had a very low capacity because there was almost no vessels moving for a while. So some of the ports had a few days a week that they shut down. And right after business started back up, the rates have just changed significantly. One of the examples I always give is Shanghai to Los Angeles. Pre-COVID, for a 40-foot container, we sometimes saw rates of about $700 to $900. And about January of this year, so just before Chinese New Year, we saw rates at about a level of $12,000 for the same container. So that just shows how the industry have changed, how the rates have changed. And one of the things that also to keep in mind is the carriers. Of course, I mean, supply and demand, but to give you guys an example, the carrier Maersk in Q4 of 2020 had a $2.5 billion pre-tax income. That just shows how much money some of the asset-based companies are doing. And I don't want to talk bad about them, but it's a lot of times it's the air and ocean carriers who are showing the supply and demand. And this is just one of the companies. All of them pretty much had massive growth in 2020, and with growth I mean also net revenue and net income. One of the other things we have seen is a chassis shortage that we've been struggling with in the US for quite some time. And going into 2021, all vessels are back at 100% capacity. Last year, some of them were taken out. space and equipment we see out of China and even out of Europe now into the US inbound. We see sometimes a 4 to 8 week delay of FAK rates, which means freight of all kinds. There's premium services that were really not present prior to COVID that a lot of the carriers put in place. So on top of the current rate that you have, if you want your cargo to actually move, you have to pay anything between $17.50 and $32.50 per container, which I think Saskia mentioned something for the European part from 1,500 to 8,000. This is the same exact level that we've been seeing, and sometimes even upwards of 8,000. There's also in the US, I mean, as one of the biggest industries in the world, we have seen a lot of delays besides the ocean carriers. We've seen massive delays in Los Angeles. For a while, we had over 34 vessels sitting in front of LA that were ready to berth, that they just didn't have the capacity to bring those vessels in. I believe this week we're still at about 20 vessels that have been waiting outside of the port for weeks, which of course causes massive delays for all the customers, suppliers, and buyers in the US, and then on a return side for the containers. The chassis shortage still continues. It's something that we have not just at the ports, but also inland destinations. And then at the ports, we see a rail movement delay for up to 4 weeks, meaning once the vessel arrives and it's been unloaded, we've seen delays for up to 4 weeks before the container has moved literally a half mile to the rail terminal to move into an inland destination. LTL and warehousing. LTL is less than truckload trucking, and the warehousing part for the US. In Q3 of Q1 to Q3, we didn't really see any rate change. It stayed pretty solid. In Q4, we saw capacity issues more and more. Again, it was the supply and demand, more people buying online, e-commerce market booming. We had some rate increases in Q4 last year, which was to expect. And then so far for 2021, we have seen a lot of delays for something that typically took 2 days. Now it sometimes takes 3 to 4 days and so on. And this is again because of the capacity constraints that we had on top of some carriers going belly up last year. I think it was one in the northwestern US that actually lost all our business. And then we so far have seen a rate increase for LTL between 3 and 5% this year. And my prediction is that obviously we're going to see something like this again, most likely in Q2, if not in the beginning of Q3. For the warehousing side of things, the US was always a pretty, I would say, relaxed market in terms of capacity. The capacity, however, for everybody that we speak to, that's customers and vendors and partners, we have seen that capacities are literally non-existing. A lot of the facilities, doesn't matter if it's a customer-owned facility or a freight forwarder, 3PL, 4PL, we have seen that those facilities are at a maximum capacity. And I think it's going to stay the same. And that has to do with people trying to have more cargo on hand because of the delays that are caused by international air and ocean freight. And it started on the coast, and we have seen it all the way in the Midwest now. I mean, every facility, everybody that I've spoken to, or some of my colleagues, they are full. There's no space, there's no capacity, which again, it will put a damper in a lot of people's e-commerce business or regular parts deliveries for automotive suppliers or other machinery. For 2021, there's a couple of things, and I've spoken to quite a few people, and it's easier said than done. But a few things that we have told our customers, and again, it's not easy, it's increase your freight budget. For everybody that hasn't done so already, I mean, this is an absolute necessity because we don't think this is going to change anytime soon. The way the air freight market is, the way everything else is going, we just don't think that freight costs will go down, at least not significantly or pre-COVID levels. Increased lead times, again, it has to do with the challenges of not getting space, not getting equipment, not getting any bookings confirmed, or containers standing in front of the port, or having long lead times for the domestic rail movement. Again, it's easier said than done. I mean, there was a customer I spoke to, they order now 40 weeks in advance, which to me is crazy. I mean, most companies can't even predict what they're going to sell in 40 weeks. And they have started this sometimes middle of last year. It's one of the largest retailers here in the US, and it's just absolutely fascinating to have a 40-week lead or 40-week in advance purchasing time. And then one of the things, and it's contradicting to what I have in the other slide when it comes to warehousing space, is try to get more, because if you can, again, it's going to reduce a little bit of your lead time issues that you're going to have, because it's such an unpredictable market to get any, especially ocean freight, into the US or into Germany from China. It's been devastating. Now, I mean, a lot of people, for instance, for people that are here in Germany, a lot of people have started using the rail movement from China into Germany, because now it's sometimes more cost efficient than the ocean freight portion, and it's half of the transit time to get it there. And then also, I mean, again, it's something to look into for people who have never heard of it before. There's something called an air-sea option or an sea-air option. A lot of times it's going to be less expensive than general air freight, and it's going to be in terms of transit time between an air and an ocean freight. It's something to keep in mind. We try to think outside the box. We try to find different routes and ways for our customers to help get it there sooner and cheaper. But it's been very challenging, as you, I think, all are aware of and have lived through it for the last 12 months. And this is it from my side. I hope I kept it nice and short, so we can keep things under the time constraint we have. And obviously, if you have any questions, I'm sure Brooke and the team is more than happy to share my contact information. And of course, I'm here for questions.
Thank you, Merlin. Very interesting also hearing what you guys have experienced. And I think based on the breakout room today and a lot of people in the call, it seems like the pains are being felt very similar in response, of course, to capacity issues. And I think I've heard from all three of our speakers now how expensive and how much increase, of course, logistics has occurred. So I also want to point out when Thomas did mention that it was 1 year ago today, that was not planned, and it happened to be a little bit coincidental. I did think about it and I was like, oh my gosh, it is March 11th. This is kind of a historic day, you know, when we think about what March 11th was in 2020. So being on the 1 year anniversary, I think this topic to be very appropriate. Now I would like to switch into the panel discussion. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do have quite a few questions that were submitted from the audience prior to registration, and then a few that have come into me in my chat function. So I'll just go ahead and start off. The first one for Saskia, I think this one might relate to your presentation and maybe your background pretty well. So the company is in the automotive industry, and they have mentioned that they're currently experiencing irrational demand and struggling with inventory planning. So their question is how to better prepare for those irrational demands and adjust their inventory, of course, given all of the struggles in the logistics and supply chain field. Maybe if you wanted to give a few examples or some recommendations for this question, that'd be great. And you're muted.
Big issue. Okay. Yeah. So it's a difficult, tricky question actually. I will try to answer it a bit in a more general way. So firstly, this irrational demand that was also something which I put in onto the slides beforehand. It's an unusual situation, so we don't have data in hand to actually see how the developments are going in the near future. So what I see here as a strong future development is to have a look at different AI options, but AI options which do not need historical data, internal data, but which are relying on social media. So they can actually at least provide a hint what are the people actually trying to buy, so one can actually already predict. So in Germany we had the big issues with noodles, so noodles were not available last year, so this kind of demand increase could have actually been figured out by social media and AI components. And then in terms of inventory planning, this is a transparency issue. So we need to build up more transparency within the supply chain. We need to see which kind of stock is in the pipeline, and also who's actually delivering which kind of what kind of goods, and what's their current status. Are they really going to deliver in near future? So this could be, so once we have got the end-tier transparency here, and also about the pipeline knowledge that would be able to be covered in future then by platform solutions. And I also think like Thomas was mentioning it early on, it's kind of Corona is actually giving a push of new mega trends. So digitalization and platform economy, these are the two trends which are moving straight forward due to Corona as well.
Perfect. I think that's a really good explanation. Maybe really quick to also follow up on that. Would that be something that the simulation could help track? I know you mentioned it in your presentation. It's hard to adjust for demands, of course, but maybe if using that simulation tool, they could give different scenarios.
Yeah, so what the simulation could actually dock onto it and then see what kind of demand is mainly predicted, or which kind of scenarios are mainly predicted by the AI technology, and then one could actually see what kind of impact does it have on the supply chain and on the suppliers. What kind of demands do I need to post in the near future? Mm-hmm. So it would be kind of so you have got the platform economy, and then the simulation would be the part on top, which is figuring out or showing how the supply chain is reacting in case some amendments are happening.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. I think that's a really good answer. And then hopefully, if whoever asked that question, if you're still on and if you have follow-ups to that, feel free to write it in the chat, or, of course, this is a very informal part. So if you do want to unmute yourself and jump on in, feel free. And this goes to all questions being asked. Maybe next I'll jump into Thomas. A question for you is, one question that was submitted was how unforgiven contractual demands can be managed, while of course being dependent on the availability of logistic providers and the added backlog, as was mentioned today with ports and border crossing and customs, those issues. So how to kind of navigate those contractual demands, as well as the long lead time back order that's being seen in the logistics industry. You give some insight maybe with what UPS is and your background.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, which probably as a representative of a logistics company, don't want to mention out loud, but I think from a risk management, as it was mentioned before, you probably have to have for such cases a plan B, meaning that you got possibility to switch carrier, or to shift your mode in case something happens. So maybe have a dual carrier strategy, just to make sure that in good times, right? That's maybe not needed so much, but in bad times, or when there is something that maybe in a certain geo one carrier cannot deliver, then you can switch out. The other thing is that if you work with an integrator, right, that has a broad capability, which for example, we got insurance with UPS Capital, we got our own brokerage department. When you have those things in one hand, kind of in a closed loop, you can make sure that from a brokerage perspective, from crossing borders, you get a fully integrated and seamless stream for your goods. The other thing is I think it's paperless, right? It was mentioned with digitalization. It really has to do with paperless as well. So as soon as a paper is involved, it might get stuck somewhere. And if you actually data transmit or already the customs information, the clearance information electronically, that totally helps getting some of these concerns out of the way. And I think it really depends on what's your safety net when for crisis, any kind of crisis. It could be raw material shortage or whatever, that you have different sourcing possibilities, but also different means of logistics and transportation. And then just have partners at hand that in-house some of these capabilities and offer, like brokerage. Can you use broker of choice with UPS? You can use your own broker, but the data transmission between the transportation company and the broker then is given. So you just make sure that the data streams are not broken.
Mm-hmm. I'm muted. Perfect. Yeah, and that question was from a North American distributor of machine tool parts, which are originally made in Europe. So I think that is, yeah, really good insights, and also hopefully give the ASCII of the question some points to consider along with the presentations that have been talked about today. I do want to move a little bit to the capacity questions. I know, Merlin, you talked quite a bit about that. Do you have recommendations for any companies online today that would like to import products from Europe and Asia into the US in finding ocean vessel space for those high associated costs? You know, you said that you don't think they're going anywhere. What is your recommendation other than maybe increasing the budget?
Recommendation, I mean, one of the first things that everybody should do if they haven't done so already is try to pre-book space more in advance. A lot of times you know what you're buying, you know what the lead times are for your products. Go to your carriers and give them more of an advance notice instead of 1 or 2 weeks. If you can do 4, 5, 6 weeks, give them the notice in advance. That will definitely increase your chance of getting a booking in a space for a rate that is not going to cost you an arm and a leg. It's not guaranteed, but it's going to be a better possibility. And then on the air freight side of things, to get something better, talk to your carriers. See if they have something that we call a BSA. It's a blocked space agreement with certain airlines, where they don't have to go onto the market and look for space, which at that time you're going to pay a premium. If they have something, which almost all of us have, which is a blocked space, the chance of you moving at a normal rate is going to be a lot better. So again, try to give your carriers as much notice as possible, and then also talk to them and see if they have something like a blocked space agreement in place.
I would assume that goes inbound, of course, to when importing products, but then also exporting products.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
direction. Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Great. Well, I think that was pretty straightforward, but again, whoever asked that question, if you have follow-ups to it, Merlin's contact information is on his PowerPoint. Or you can, of course, contact me, and I'll be happy to put you in contact with any of these speakers today as a question comes up if you'd like to elaborate more. Of course, just to plug in that the discussion doesn't have to end today here. Another question that I have, this is from a German tech company. So they import technical band, actually, if you will. And they're interested in understanding how to create a more resilient supply chain in their import process. Thomas, I don't know, I know you talked a little bit about that in your presentation, but could you maybe elaborate, maybe in this industry or with this product, really the key points are to help companies, make sure that their supply chain processes are as resilient as possible in this crisis?
Yeah, I think it's really resilience has to come in getting the sourcing, as was mentioned before, the sourcing synchronized up with the production or your sales area, so to speak. And I think one of the items that is important is visibility, right? You really gotta know where your goods are, not just outbound, right? When you ship to your I don't know, wholesaler or your clients, but also inbound. And I think that's where it's really important to use the data capabilities that your logistics provider has to make sure that you exactly know where's that ship, where's that plane, where's my package, to be able to, especially when you have like issues as well now, like in the pandemic, where you have your employees at home or working Kurzarbeit, short-term work, and then you can, if you have that visibility, then you can make sure that you plan better and that you are not surprised that you might experience a delay in shipping, which can always be unforeseen. And I think that's really important, that from a technology, from a visibility, transparency point of view, that you are up to speed on where things are. It's not, you might also, but that goes more outside of a logistics discussion, get into having different suppliers where you can actually hop, right? You have different geos. And I think there was another question, an additional question about how to source. You just got to make sure that you can jump quickly from one to the other end if one of your sources is not working anymore. But I think from a logistics company, our biggest advice would be make sure you got full transparency, full visibility from inbound and not just from the outbound side, because I think the inbound side gets very often neglected when it comes to the whole planning and transparency.
If I might
shortly
add on that, a very important point which you just mentioned, Thomas, was about the second source which you have in hand. But the second source can't be found immediately from one day to another. So mainly it is to also, since we see actually more and more volatility in the supply chain, these kind of, I mean, as a supply chain manager would have to have a look into it to have proactive risk management in hand. So to actually already think about it beforehand, what might be the unexpected developments in near future, so that one actually opens already some doors which don't need to, I mean, they don't need to forcefully cost more money. It's just to have the flexibility options in hand to already put that in a supply chain design phase inside, that one has got flexibility here. So it might, so there are several options which one can use, which do not forcefully increase the cost dramatically.
I think, Saskia, you're mentioning stress tests on one of your slides, right? And that kind of now talking about what you just mentioned made me remember the banking stress tests, right? I mean, governments are asking for, in Europe at least, or I think in the US as well, for stress tests for banks. And I guess that's something that many companies, especially small and medium-sized businesses, should do more often as well, to have that stress test, to make sure, as Saskia says, to be well ahead of anything that could happen, right? And I think that really makes sense and helps in good time to get prepared.
One question I have, and maybe this would be a little bit more related to Merlin as it's local in the US, there has been a trend, or at least a lot of talk around reshoring and bringing production, of course, back to the US. Be interested to know if that's a discussion in Germany as well. But Merlin, I know you deal a little bit in the automotive industry. I know that topic's been big there, talking about suppliers or, maybe bringing a lot of manufacturing local so that you don't have to ship or supply from other industries. Is this a topic you've heard a lot about? Could you talk a little bit about that to see if that's a solution to, of course, supply chain disruption?
In talking to my clients, again, who most of them are in the automotive industry, between tier 1, 3, and actually some OEMs. So far, I have not really heard anything about bringing it back here, just because the cost was set up, the cost of labor, and everything else, even with the increased cost on the supply chain and the additional lead times. I have not heard anybody speaking so far about it. I mean, everybody has continued the imports the way they've done it over the past 10, 20, 30 years. And we have seen such an increase in imports when it comes to the automotive. So as far as I know, for the US side, again, talking to my clients, I haven't seen anything like that. So I don't know if Saskia and Thomas have something else to say in this one, but for me, I haven't seen anything like that.
Perfect. Yeah, Saskia, would you like to add?
I completely agree with what Merlin said. I suppose, though, that, I mean, especially for the automotive industry, they are already very, very global. To change the whole structure here would be quite difficult. I might think that it happens in different industries, though, that there might be a more regional supply chain setting up, especially in the food industry, where you have got to deal with the shelf lives as well. So, so I think it really depends on the type of industry you're dealing with.
Yeah, that's really helpful information. Of course, when workplace safety was also an issue, keeping manufacturers safe, because the pandemic was hitting different countries at different times, maybe that was a little bit more chatted about topic last year as production was shut down in different areas. But really interesting to hear your insights. Another question that I have is how, sorry, lost my part really quick on there. For Saskia, so rebalancing short-term sourcing decisions, you already said to have a backup plan, look into, of course, volatility, what the new supplier is. I suppose there's a certain level of underwriting that goes in when you vet a new supplier. Can you talk about the process that goes into, of course, looking into how to have a backup plan, how to consider different alternatives of having a supplier, and really, I guess, change your supply chain management to a certain degree in order to make it stronger or to, not have it. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's mainly about to have an adjustment of the lead times within the supply chain as well, to have a look also where are the different suppliers located, and do I have actually an option to switch to another company? So I have got one company in the medicinal industry, and they have on the medical industry, and they have got the issue that they take a lot of supplies from the US, and during Corona they actually wanted to shift to Europe. They had no options. They did not find the right suppliers over here. What would help here also is to have a kind of a supplier base. I suppose also that in the next years there will be a platform. Some startup will come up who's actually providing this kind of service to find your own the new supplier base. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and then to have a look at already on an early stage what are the options, and then once you actually are able to, once the pandemic or once the risk is actually realizing, that you check then again your options and what is the best way to work it around. There won't be, I mean, there will always be kind of a damage happening that it should be clear about, but actually to keep the damage as low as possible, that's the main goal in this situation.
Perfect. And I just got one last question in very quickly. So this one I'm actually going to hand over to Thomas, and then we'll be out of time. But Thomas, the question is, if your company has incorporated many blockchain technologies, of course, you talked about transparency, data tracking. I'm just wondering, I guess, how familiar in your role you are with using blockchain technology to track, of course, shipments and things of that nature.
Yeah, we have heavily invested as well in blockchain. I think we're part of projects as well. So it is definitely part, especially when you look into the brokerage situation, to make sure that the data we get is A, protected, and B, you know, just the whole process is safe. So we use that within our technology, and we also, I think there's much more potential with blockchain technology as such, also from, you know, the payment cycles and all that. So security, safety, especially on the capital side, is big. So it's part of our daily work, but also technology that we use more in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you could probably have a whole webinar on blockchain in itself. So realizing that we are already a minute over, I just want to wrap up and say thank you again to everybody who joined today. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're really appreciative to have so many names and faces we see reoccurring from last month to this month as well. Another super big thank you to our speakers today. I was totally impressed and fascinated by the comments you brought, and I hope that all of the attendees enjoyed it as much as I did. We will be dropping a quick survey link into the chat function. If you would be kind enough to take the survey, it'll take about 3 to 4 minutes. Just tell us what you really liked about today, what you think that we could do better. Like I said, this will all be internal just because this is a series that will continue now until January of 2022. So we will have once a month a webinar just like this, and of course always looking to improve or to hear from you with topics that may be interesting when considering how the pandemic has disrupted your business. At that, if there are any other questions, feel free to write me an email. You should have all had my email in the registration form if you would like to be connected with any of our speakers or other attendees today. Also, I'm happy to put you in touch if you would reach out. Thank you again so much for joining, and we hope to see you next month when we talk about deurbanization, how residents have moved from the cities into the suburbs and rural areas as a result of the pandemic. Have a great rest of your day and a great evening, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you again, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Brooke. Thanks, everybody.